it.
Wait a start.
Yep.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Development Management Committee. I am Councillor Peter Gregg, the chairman of this meeting. Before we start the meeting, I need to make the public attending aware of the following. We are not expecting a fire drill, so if the fire alarm goes off, please make your way out of the nearest emergency exit and gather at the front of Runnymede Hall. Meetings of the committee are webcast and broadcast on the internet. Whether you're seated up there, if you don't wish to be photographed, filmed, perhaps move to the other end of the seating arrangement. May I ask the Development Management Committee members present who are seated in the chamber in the front row of me to introduce themselves, stating your name only, starting on my left.
Councillor John Anderson. Councillor Kieran Bowker.
Councillor Hannah Barton-Brown.
Councillor Jackie Thornton.
Councillor Andrew Thornton.
Councillor Colin Riley.
Councillor Simon Hart.
And now can I ask the Town Council representatives to introduce themselves?
Yes, Steve Sates, Chairman of Planning on Town Council.
Councillor Elaine Harvey.
Thank you. May I now ask the officers present to introduce themselves, again starting on my left.
Stephen Garner, Planning Officer.
Kim Fisher-Pike, the Strategic Developments Officer.
Loretta Hill, Committee Officer, and I'm observing tonight.
Cheryl Salmon, I'm also a Committee Officer and I'll be taking the minutes.
David Bland, I'm the legal advisor this evening, and to my right is Jason Bishop, the solicitor to the council. Thank you.
Are there any members' interest?
Apologies. You should do apologies first.
Oh, sorry. Are there any apologies for absence at all?
Chairman, I have apologies from Councillor Chas Mumford, and Councillor Colin Riley is substituting for him this evening, and Councillor Tom Skip and Councillor Andrew Thornton is substituting for him this evening.
Thank you. Are there any members' interests? No? Are the minutes for the Development Management Committee meeting held on the 5th of April on 2022 agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Thank you. We have the following public speakers this evening for item 1. Mr. Fulton, objection. Ms. Simpson in support on behalf of the applicant, and Councillor Mountford, a ward member. Okay. Item 5, deposited plans. Land rear of 248 Hart Road, Thundersley, Benfleet. It's Cedar Hall ward.
Sorry, Councillor Gregg. Councillor McLean wanted to say.
Sorry, Chairman, I'd also like to speak on that item, please.
That's up to you.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, Councillor Gregg, you're a ward member? Yeah. Just to clarify, you're supposed to give notice, but...
Okay. Following the plan and officer's presentation then, Mr. Fort, would you like to make your 3-minute statement? So I'll now hand over to Kim Fisher. Thank you.
Just to locate the site. This is a site on the south side of Hart Road. It's a site with an area of 1.7 hectares. Just to locate it a little more closely, this is Cedar Hall School. There's the Cedar Hall School there. This is the site in here. Goes down to the brook at the far end. You've got houses on the frontage, houses to the east and west. Within the adopted local plan, this site is allocated partially for greenbelt purposes and partially for residential purposes. If you go back to this, oh, for goodness sake.
It's all right.
The top half here, this area here, this is allocated for residential purposes.
Councillor Anderson, can I?
Thank you, Chairman. Kim, could you speak a little bit louder? I'm not quite hearing you.
Yep, no problem at all, sir.
Thank you.
Right. Site here is partly allocated for greenbelt purposes, partly allocated for residential purposes. Residential element is in this area here. The rest of the land is allocated for greenbelt in your 1998 adopted local plan. As members will be aware from the site visit, part of the site in this location is previously developed. It has a number of stable blocks on it, other buildings associated with the use of the site as an equestrian facility previously. The southern part of the site is also identified as a local wildlife site. It's part of what is known as CPT 23, which is the Thundersley plotlands. And it's part of a mosaic of sites which pretty much stretches across the Chase area. Now, individually, not all of these sites are of significant value. The value is in their group. So as a mosaic, they can provide a variety of habitats, and that gives them the value as a local wildlife site. The proposal this evening is for the redevelopment of the whole site. I'll just get up this. Right. Redevelopment of the whole site with 44 semi-detached and terrace dwellings. They're 2 and 3 bedroom properties. Each dwelling has its own parking provision. It's got the requisite associated amenity spaces. It has provision of open space at the southern end here, together with a tiny forest and a play area and an attenuation lake. The key factor of this particular scheme is that it provides 100% affordable housing. So every unit on this site will be offered either to the council as a rented property or as a affordable home ownership product. And they will be a shared ownership provision. Now, the report before you this evening goes into quite a lot of detail about this scheme. It's a fairly complex scheme, it's a fairly large scheme, and there are lots of things to consider. Now, I'm hoping members have been able to go through that report and that they're fairly aware of what the provisions are. I don't intend to go through the whole 60-odd pages in detail. But what I will do is just draw out what I think are likely to be the key concerns. And obviously at the end of the presentation, if members feel I haven't covered the points that they're particularly interested in, please ask me and I'll try to respond. Now, the key elements that I think members are most likely to be interested in are greenbelt, highways and parking, ecology and trees, and infrastructure. So, if we start with the greenbelt, it's allocated in part for greenbelt in your 1998 local plan. That's the current development plan. And the frontage of the site is residential, as I've said. Now, greenbelt policy is set out in the NPPF basically states that inappropriate development, i.e. residential development, it shouldn't be approved unless you have very special circumstances which either in isolation or combination outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. There is a presumption in the NPPF that any inappropriate development is harmful. And what you need to do is balance that harm against any benefits that the scheme might accrue. Now, in this case, I think there are a number of the very special circumstances that members need to have in their minds when they're considering this proposal. We know it's greenbelt, we know development's inappropriate, it's now balancing that up against the other considerations. Now, I think key amongst the considerations is the fact that we have a general housing need. We know we can't meet that housing need from the existing urban area. And we know that if we're going to meet our housing needs, we need to look beyond the urban area. So you need to be looking at greenbelt sites. Historically, we have underprovided. So there's always been this pressure on the greenbelt to release to meet your needs. Now, because we're in a situation where we have an out-of-date local plan, you're always going to be judged against the standard methodology, which is the government mechanism for determining what your housing need is. So that has set a number, and we know that against that number, we only have about 2.3 years of supply, and we need 5. Now, when we were looking at the local plan, the new local plan, we obviously had to consider our housing needs. Now, I'm not going to go into the merits or otherwise of the local plan tonight. What I'm going to be focusing on is the evidence which underpins that plan. All the assessments, all the reviews, all the work that went into determining what the numbers should be and where those numbers might best be accommodated with least harm to the greenbelt. The fact that we have a housing need that we can't meet within the urban area is a matter which carries some weight. Now, the government has said, on its own, housing need wouldn't constitute very special circumstances. But the courts have held that in association with other matters, it can add weight to that consideration. So you need to be aware that we have a need, and that's in the balance when you're looking at releasing land from the greenbelt for housing purposes. The other consideration, of course, is it's 100% affordable. We have a significant need for affordable housing in this borough. In fact, bearing in mind that the figures state we need 355 dwellings per annum, our affordable housing need would take 353 of those. So as you can see, it's a significant requirement. Now, it's not practical, it's not viable for every developer to come forward and offer that level of affordable housing on the site. Your old local plan sought to achieve 35%. Your new local plan seeks to provide up to 40%. If you apply those figures to this site, you get between 16 and 18 units. This proposal provides 44 units. Now, our new policy talks about the types of affordable housing. So we have a provision which says within the usual 35 or 40% that you might look at, we'd expect half to be social rent and half to be home ownership products. This site doesn't quite meet that provision. There are 8 social rent, affordable rent properties, and there are 36 home ownership products. I think you need to bear in mind that whilst the rental properties are perhaps slightly lower than we'd expect, that's balanced by the fact that you are achieving home ownership products for which we know there is a need. The council's housing, finance and development manager has confirmed we have a need for this type of property. So that need is something, again, you need to bear in mind in the balance. The third thing you need to think about is the evidence underpinning the new local plan. That work assessed your housing needs, it looked at where those needs might be provided, and it went through a fairly rigorous process of assessing every greenbelt site placed before it for consideration and deciding whether that land could be released without harm to the greenbelt. Now, this particular site forms part of a site which is allocated in the new local plans HO20, which pretty much covers all of the undeveloped area around the Chase. When we were looking at the Chase, and when we were looking at it in the context of the strategic greenbelt, whilst it's acknowledged and agreed that the Chase serves the greenbelt function of protecting countryside and preventing sprawl, because obviously there's a space there that houses aren't encroaching into. If you think of it in terms of the strategic greenbelt and the greenbelt's true purpose in planning terms, this site doesn't perform particularly strongly. It doesn't help us not merge with Rayleigh. It doesn't help us not merge with parts of Southend. It prevents parts of Thundersley merging with parts of Thundersley. So its value as a strategic piece of greenbelt is limited. And because of that limitation, when you're looking at a situation where you have to provide housing land and you can't provide it in the urban area and you're looking for the least worst option, the Chase presented itself as one of the least worst options in terms of the impact on the strategic functions of the greenbelt, which is why it was allocated in your new local plan. Now, all of that is information which is widely available. The developers are aware of it. The inspector was aware of it. The inspector assessed it in detail and could find no fault with the logic. Developers are going to look at that and go, well, actually, in terms of your greenbelt, this isn't so harmful. And in terms of the soundness of the logic behind that allocation, it's sound. So that soundness weighs in favour of the development. It's all part of that balance. So on the one hand, you've got its greenbelt, but against that, you have to weigh up our housing need, the fact that this provides affordable housing for which we have a desperate need, and the fact that the allocation in your new local plan, even though it's not adopted, the evidence strongly supports the release of this site. And when you weigh all of those factors up, they outweigh the harm to the greenbelt. And it's on that basis that the recommendation before you today does not identify an objection to this proposal on the basis of greenbelt policy. The merits of the scheme are such that they outweigh the fairly minor harm to the strategic objectives of the greenbelt. So, moving on to the next concern, which is highways and parking. Now, I know members were worried about this site and about the access coming out onto Hart Road because it's close to a school, it's on a bend, and it's a fairly narrow carriageway. And we know Hart Road experiences traffic issues. We consulted Essex County Council. They required a highway safety audit from the developer, which was provided. Essex County Council have assessed that audit, they have assessed the proposal, and they raised no objection to the scheme and no objection to the site gaining access from Hart Road. Now again, whilst HO 20 is not your adopted policy, that did say actually this site should be fed from the south. It should come up from the Chase. There are a couple of reasons why that's not achieved in this instance. The first reason is that the developer of this site has no means of accessing the Chase. He has no means of accessing Rayleigh Road. This site doesn't abut those sites. It's not contiguous to those highways, so it can't gain access. And there's also the issue, if you look at the southern part of the site, this is the most ecologically valuable around the brook here. If you were to take access through here, you're going to adversely impact on the ecology of this site. So given that there are disadvantages to coming from the south, given that in practical terms it's not currently feasible, and given that the Essex County Council Highway Authority raised no objection to the proposal, we can't sustain an objection on the basis of highway impact. Turning to wildlife and ecology. The southern half of the site is identified as a local wildlife site. Well, it was identified as a local wildlife site in 2012. In 2019, it was reviewed. And at that time, parts of the Chase were removed because it had been lost to development. And they looked at this site again and decided, actually, because of the way the land was being managed, it was being used for grazing, its biodiversity value had declined. And that in order to recover from that, it would need some positive management. Well, that hasn't happened. There was no requirement for it to happen. You can't require someone to manage their land. And as a consequence of grazing, the quality of the land in habitat terms has declined to the point where in the ecological survey undertaken by the consultant, the view is expressed that were the site to be reviewed again, because of its poor quality, it's unlikely to maintain its LOWS designation. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that we can just go, oh, well, it's got no wildlife interest, wildlife doesn't matter. It does matter, and the applicant's aware that it matters. And what they've done within the context of the application is a significant amount of work in terms of regenerating the biodiversity of this site. Now, at the southern end, at the moment, it's grazed, it has low value. It's intended to create a tiny forest, which will create habitat for birds. It will provide food sources for hedgehogs and badgers. It will provide shady areas for reptiles. In addition, they're going to create a meadow, which again will have habitat advantages for the wildlife. They intend to plant something like 2,000 new plants around the boundary of the site to increase the hedgerows. They intend to provide something like 830 new trees across the site, all of which have biodiversity value. And they're also going to provide a badger path. Now, when we first started looking at this site, we were concerned that badgers cross the site. They don't forage on the site because the ground's too hard and there aren't enough earthworms and badgers aren't particularly interested in it. But they do go to the south. So they're on a site to the east. They would cross this site, go south and forage there and then return. And what we didn't want is pathways being obstructed by development. So what the developer has done is provided a pathway along the eastern side of the site, which will be maintained free of development. It will be planted and it will be protected for the use of badgers and hedgehogs and any other animals that want to use it, so they can get to foraging grounds further to the south and in the wider Chase area. And because they're providing lots of trees and berry bushes and fruiting bushes, they're increasing the food stock for those creatures as well. So the site actually achieves a fairly substantial gain in biodiversity value as a consequence of the development. Final issue is infrastructure. Everyone worries that development will result in increased pressure on doctors and dentists and the power supply and the water supply. This scheme is required to meet its own needs, as all large schemes are. So the developer will provide financial contributions towards doctor surgeries, towards other medical facilities, towards sports provision, towards education, towards libraries. Any aspect of this scheme which has a community impact in terms of those facilities, this scheme will make a contribution to meet their needs. They cannot meet an existing deficiency. We're not allowed to ask for that. But they must meet their own needs, and they do. So, in summary, it's a complex site. It's a difficult decision. It's Greenbelt. There are lots of pressures on protecting Greenbelt. There are also lots of pressures on providing homes for local people. And this will be for local people because we will seek nomination rights and income thresholds and location criteria which ensure that they remain for local people. It achieves significant benefits in biodiversity and it has no adverse impact on infrastructure provision. So for all of those reasons, the recommendation before you tonight is one of approval. Now, the one thing I must say is because if members approve this site, it would represent a departure from your current development plan. It's not one you can determine tonight. We would have to go to the Secretary of State and ask him if he wanted to call the application in for his own determination. What I would ask members to do tonight, if they were minded to adopt the recommendation, is to adopt the resolution and then, subject to the Secretary of State raising no objection and not wishing to call it in for himself, that matter would then pass and that would be the approval of the committee subject to the 106, the details of which are set out in the agenda. So if members are happy with that as a way forward, that's the recommendation before you this evening. And I'd hope members can adopt that recommendation. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. Would you now, Mr. Fort, like to take your 3-minute statement, please. And you are being timed from when you start.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm speaking in opposition to this proposal tonight because of the significant amount of the proposal which is under Greenbelt allocation in the 1998 local plan. I think it's inappropriate to put so much weighting on a emerging local plan which has wasn't adopted in March, so very recently. And also there's a great deal of uncertainty around the emerging local plan as it is. I understand there's obviously a lot of evidence behind to support that this may not cause that much harm to the Greenbelt, but it's still not an adopted site in a local plan, and I worry as well that if this was approved tonight, that this would then give precedent to other sites that are in the Greenbelt and are not adopted in the local plan at the moment, or just in any sort of plan at the moment, that gives it precedent for that to go forward as well. I'm also a bit concerned about the fact that this constitutes part of a wider site, and this is not coming forward as part of the master planning process. So I'm a bit concerned that the developer here is maybe trying to get around the master planning process, which might help control numbers a bit more. And also, you know, try and get out some of the provisions they should be making as well. Also, I would like to, if members do decide to go ahead with the proposal tonight, I would like to make sure that they also keep this as put some conditions that make sure that it stays as 100% social housing, and also that it serves local people in terms of the affordability requirements, that sort of thing for the shared ownership properties. Obviously, my still preference is that it isn't adopted tonight because of the don't want to deteriorate the value of the Greenbelt and our strength in fighting against that inappropriate development in the Greenbelt as well. And as well, I don't like the fact that it's coming forward as not a part of the master planning process. So, worried that developers that might sort of use that to sort of try and wedge in more housing numbers, and also give precedent into other sites across the borough which are also multiple ownership, split up into smaller bits as well. Worried that sort of also gives precedent to other sites across the borough should this be approved to do similar sort of things to avoid the master planning process, and allow sort of developers to do what they will on a piecemeal basis. I think that pretty much summarises what I wanted to object against today, so keep it short and sweet as possible. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay. Ms Simpson, please. Right,
Thank
your
you,
2 minutes
Chair.
will start. 3 minutes, sorry,
3
will
minutes.
start from now.
Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. My name's Annette Simpson, and I work for Legal and General Affordable Homes. We were established in 2018 to increase the supply, quality and choice of affordable housing across England. And I was really keen to address you all this evening because I think it's really important that you hear from us to understand our commitment to delivering quality and ensuring that these affordable homes are delivered and remain affordable in perpetuity. The proposal being considered this evening, as you've heard, is for the delivery of 44 genuinely affordable 2- and 3-bedroom homes for shared ownership and affordable rent. These homes will be made available to local people living or working in the borough, and that will be guaranteed through the Section 106 agreement. We're in the midst of a housing emergency and a cost of living crisis where not enough affordable homes are being delivered to meet need. There are nearly 600 households on the council's housing waiting list. The average house price is now over 12 times the average local salary. This development will enable home ownership to local people for 30% less than purchasing homes on the open market. And all the affordable rent homes will be offered at rents less than 80% of market rent in the local area. The site is privately owned. It is not publicly accessible. It is not part of the borough's open countryside. It's very different to the typical greenbelt land that understandably the council is keen to preserve. The redevelopment of this site will enable public access and provide a network of pedestrian routes through it. The development of this site will also take the pressure off delivering housing on other sites within the borough. The site is in an accessible and sustainable location with good access to public transport and local amenities. Over 20% of the site will become green space, including a play area, a pond, wildflower meadow, and a small area for native woodland. Whilst we do have to remove 13 small trees, we are proposing over 800 new trees and 2,000 hedgerow plants. So as you've already heard, there will be a biodiversity gain through the redevelopment of this site. All homes will be built to EPC A rating, and we are looking at whether we can get all the homes to net zero carbon. All homes will be provided with electric vehicle charging points. Importantly, this will reduce the long-term cost of living for residents living here, substantially reducing utility bills, as well as having an environmental benefit. The development will also benefit the local economy by providing jobs and investment. 80% of the on-site workforce will be sourced locally, and the day-to-day management of the homes will be provided by Chelmer Housing Partnership, a local housing association and one of our trusted partners. So in summary, the application would utilise land which is technically green-built but is of no public benefit and no landscape merit and contributes very little to the strategic purposes of the green belt. But what we're proposing is to provide 44 affordable homes. We hope, therefore, that you can see that there is an exceptional case for the redevelopment of the site. Legal and General, we're strategic partners of Homes England, and we've been allocated 125 million.
Your 3 minutes is now up.
Okay, that's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Sorry. No, yeah, I suppose you better. Right. Councillor Mountford, would you like to take the stand, please?
Oh, I can see it, he can remain. Oh.
He wants to do it from there.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. I'm speaking on behalf of the residents this evening, not just the residents that live locally, but in the surrounding areas as well. I think there's many issues, and previous Councillor Fort's made some very good arguments. The one thing that has never been mentioned this evening is flooding. Ashcroft Place, I won't go into all the details, but we know there's significant issues with Ashcroft Place, and none of that has been brought up this evening. None of the residents understand the local plan being sound by our inspector, and no one can understand how access next to a special needs school can be allowed. It beggars belief. It's a special needs school. It's a busy road, and we talk about bus routes, and I hear all of the information and arguments for this, and I think it's great we want to do affordable housing, but not on land that's designated as green belt that we're trying to convert. We should be looking for brownfield sites. The bus route has recently been stopped on that route, so there's limited buses, so we really need to be clear on what we are trying to sell here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Councillor McLean,
Thank
would
you,
you
Chairman.
like to put your case forward?
I'm okay to sit here still?
Yeah, by all means.
Thank you. Okay. As the ward member, I've received a number of representations from residents in the immediate area and the wider community against the development, and I share the disappointment of the residents at the Essex County Council response to the highways issues. My residents have concerns that the access from the site onto Hart Road at the narrowest and fastest section of the road, the proximity of those vehicle movements just yards away from Cedar Hall School and the busy Swans Green playground, and also thirdly for the 60 plus residents plus visitors vehicles which will undoubtedly crowd the neighbouring roads. As the ward member, I have lots and lots of emails in respect of Triton Way for the parking there, and there's little doubt that from this particular development they'll be parking on the outside roads as well. The vast majority of the residents also welcome affordable housing. I mean, it's a joy, isn't it? 100% affordable housing in the borough. It's just exactly what we need, but the location isn't right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor McLean. Do you have any further comments to make?
Yes, so if I can just come back on some of the points that were made. Going back to Mr. Falk's comments, in my report and in my presentation I was very clear, I'm not referencing the local plan. It's the evidence underpinning the local plan. Regardless of what happens with the local plan, that evidence is not going to disappear. It will be there. It will be relied upon by the developers. And more applications are coming in. We've already got another application in. So please don't think that if you refuse this one, no one else is going to come forward. They will. The evidence is available to developers. It's available to you. It's also available to the inspectorate. So if we do get into a situation where the developers feel they need to go to appeal, the inspectorate will look at that evidence and they will draw their own conclusions. In terms of precedent, every scheme's dealt with on its own merits. There is no precedent. If a scheme is unacceptable for whatever reason, then it's unacceptable. If another scheme is acceptable, it will be determined on that basis. But you can't take a decision on one and apply it across all. Everyone is considered on the individual merits. In terms of your comments on prematurity and the master plan and HO20, the difficulty we have is that HO20 is not your adopted policy. HO20 does, however, make provision so that if it had been adopted, certain schemes could come forward within HO20 because we knew it was a fragmented site and we knew people would want to get on and do their parts. The only criteria we have is that, yes, you can do that, but you need to do it within the context of the overarching master plan. So it wouldn't be premature in terms of the master plan because the policy allows them to do this. And if they conform with the requirements, then that's fine. And they do. They're completely consistent with the master plan in all but two areas. One is access, which we've already discussed, and the other is the Arcadian nature of development. HO20 says that within the chase generally, we should adopt an Arcadian approach to design. And what that means is that development should be dominated by the landscape. Clearly, this scheme doesn't achieve that. But you have to read the inspector's report. Because what the inspector did was take our original provision for 340 homes across the site and replace it with 412 still to be provided. He took the view that the site had further capacity and that we were perhaps being a little bit limited in our outlook on what the site could achieve. So he increased the capacity. That clearly will have implications to what you can achieve on the site. And the view's been taken that if you are going to have to increase the numbers on the site, better to increase those numbers on sites which are more sustainable, less environmentally sensitive, less ecologically valuable and fragile, so that, yes, you will get dense pockets of development, but that will allow you to provide less dense pockets of development and the more Arcadian outlook in those areas. And this scheme is consistent with that. You've already heard from Ms Simpson, it's 100% affordable. It will be enshrined in a 106. There's no moving away from that. That's what it is. There will be mechanisms in place which will ensure that in perpetuity. Councillor Mountford, in terms of flooding, this site is in flood zone 1. It's in critical drainage area zone 3, which means there is an issue with surface water flooding. And initially, the LLFA, which is Essex County Council responsible for surface water control, did express concerns. But the developer did a lot of work with the county and came back with a scheme which satisfied the LLFA, which means that this site does not pose a flood risk to itself or to its neighbours. Flood risk here is not an issue. Councillor McCain, I hear what you say about the Greenbelt and it's not being the right location, but again, you need to look at the balance. Yeah. If not here, where? Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Kim. Before I move the recommendation, do members have any questions for the planning officer about the planning application? Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chairman. I have a number of questions. Firstly, I want to show that, what a good application they put forward, LNG have put forward, offering 100% affordable homes, top quality homes, energy efficient, everything else. And that's the kind of thing that we are looking for. But my questions are against, I mean, they come up on the site visit on Monday. The access to Hart Road, which you've mentioned before, and all the reasons come up as other councillors have mentioned, that is the narrowest part of Hart Road. It is possibly one of the fastest bits. It's on a brow of a hill and close to the special needs school. I'm on the highways panel and we pushed for a 21-hour speed limit. One's there, but it's not enforced. It's a recommended speed. So that's important to remember. The whole of that road has got schools, playing fields, and shoppings around it. So that whole of Hart Road it should be much slower than it actually is. Now, going on to so I'm surprised they didn't object to it. And in the past, we tried to get a zebra crossing literally within 50 yards of that entrance, and we were told we couldn't have one for safety reasons.
Councillor Hart, can I just stop you there and ask you, what is your question?
The question is, are you happy with that, as far as that part, are you happy with the recommendation from the Height Bill, the non-issue raising from Essex County Council regarding the highways?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then also the other question I have is regarding the site itself and the inclusion of it in HO20. As part of the non-adopted local plan, all the large sites will go under master planning, and the master planning of HO20 is to be done by Castle Point Borough Council. And there has been at least one meeting of the committee to discuss the master planning of that site, and is it not premature for this application to come in? I know you mentioned it in your report, but is it not premature for it to come in now? And you already said that access for regarding in the local plan side of it says it should come from the south of the site, not from the north. So is it not affecting the total outcome of that site of HO20 if you give away a little bit now? It's not seeing the bigger picture. I understand the site is fine, where it is a problem, the site access is a problem, but the bigger picture is it not going to affect master planning of the whole site, which is, if the local plan does come forward and HO20 is in it, if you start chipping away at it bit by bit, then it alters the...
Councillor Hart, what is your question?
I've
please?
said that I want to know if that's affecting it.
So through you? No. In reality, this site is unique almost within the context of HO20. It can pretty much stand alone. It's got a direct access. It's not dependent on the land to the south or to the east. It can serve itself. And in fact, the inspector even said consideration should be given to servicing part of this site from Hart Road. It's in his report. So no, it's not going to prejudice it in that terms. In terms of it linking through to other parts of HO20, then clearly this will influence where the pedestrian links go through. But at this stage, that will be easy to accommodate. So no, it's not going to prejudice the development of the rest of the site. And again, you have to go back. You haven't adopted HO20. So within the context of HO20, it's a little difficult to argue that something will be premature, because what you're arguing is prematurity in respect of a policy that you haven't adopted. So it's a very difficult very difficult question to try and defend, if you like. If we were to go to appeal on that basis, it's a very difficult case to win, because you're trying to protect something that may not happen.
Please.
If that's the case, and you can't use the weight of the local plan, unadopted local plan as evidence, then surely the main evidence will come from the 1998 local plan, which says it's greenbelt. And to say it doesn't affect the openness of it, I don't think that counts in this case.
Now, sir, through you again. I've made it clear all the way through. I'm not relying on the local plan. I'm relying on the evidence. Now, the evidence won't change. The evidence is what it is. It's a factual statement of the situation. HO20 is a policy that was derived from that evidence. And what you're asking me is, would this proposal prejudice the implementation of HO20? And what I've said to you is that HO20 is not your adopted policy. So
I understand that.
you
You've
can't
answered
argue
that
that
question.
it's
My
premature.
The second question was, surely the 1998
The 1998 plan is your development plan. That says it's Greenbelt. I said that right at the beginning. But the evidence is part of the very special circumstances that you have to weigh up. The Greenbelt policy does not say it's Greenbelt and should not be touched. What it says is it's Greenbelt, inappropriate development is not going to be permitted. But there are some circumstances where inappropriate development could be permitted, but you need to demonstrate those very special circumstances. And the evidence underpinning your new local plan represents part of those very special circumstances.
Are there any other questions for the planning officer? Yes, Councillor Thornton, please.
Yes, I'm a little bit confused regarding the master planning and what Mr. Fort said and Simon, Councillor Hart. You said that it doesn't set a precedent. Each application is looked at on its own merits, and there's not a precedent set from decisions that have been made before. But when we've been sat in this chamber determining other applications, and there's been a parking issue, you have actually said that the decisions that have been taken before on other blocks of flats and the parking there will influence and sets a precedent to what can be made there. So I'm a little bit confused why it works in one instance and not the other.
So through you. On the parking issue, what we've always said is that it is your practice, particularly on flats, it is your practice to accept one for one. Your practice isn't a precedent. It's what you normally do, but that doesn't mean that you will always do it. And in some circumstances, you haven't always done it. So it's a fine line, but there is a distinction. You have to consider every application on its own merits, and because of that, precedent doesn't arise because you're considering each one individually. But within that consideration, you may well have particular practices that you apply. Parking's just one of those practices.
Is there anybody else who wishes to? Sorry.
So just for clarification then, in future when an application comes forward and if it's a practice, we are at liberty to refuse it, even though it's a practice. Thank you.
Are there any other questions for the planning officer? Yes, Councillor Thornton.
If the council is minded to reject this and it goes to appeal, are we at any risk of losing anything in that appeal process?
Through you, sir. Yes, is the simple answer. This scheme has come in and it's a reputable developer. They've said they'll do certain things, one of which is 100% affordable housing. There are conditions that we've requested be imposed on the grant of consent which secure an appropriate form of development, a high standard of development. On appeal, an inspector will come to his own view on whether those conditions are appropriate or not. He may decide that some of the things we've asked for, he doesn't actually think are appropriate or not necessary. And we could lose some of the benefits of the scheme because it's being considered in a different format, in a different arena. The only way you can control what goes on that site is to retain ownership of the decision making. As soon as you offer that opportunity to make a decision to any other party, you lose an element of control over the final product.
Please do.
As I understand it, that if a plan like this goes to appeal, it's judged on the merits of the plan that is put forward. So on the grounds that this is an organisation, and I think it's a brilliant development from the perspective of what they want to do there, and they're proposing that, it's not something that we are demanding, I don't see what are we demanding. Could you be more specific about what we are demanding over and above what they are offering to give us a situation where we are at risk?
It's difficult to second guess what an inspector might come to a view on. But for example, he might decide that actually, whilst we want to retain 2-car parking spaces, he's not going to impose a condition that requires that. He may not decide to impose a condition that requires the provision of electric charging points. He may not require quite so much landscaping. So whilst the applicant has stated they will do it, and I have no reason to doubt that they would do it, you can't necessarily assume that an inspector would come to the same view. And whilst one would like to think that the applicant would stand by the original premise, if there's nothing in a planning permission which requires them to do something, there will always be a risk that that doesn't happen.
Are there any other questions for the planning officer at all? Okay. The planning officer's recommendation is for approval after referral to the Secretary of State and the applicant being willing to enter into a 106 agreement and subject to conditions as set out in the report. For the purpose of debate, I move the recommendation. Sorry. Does anybody want to comment at all? Make any... Please, Councillor Hart.
Thank you, Chairman. On the site visit, we discussed the trees on the boundary. And the proposal is that the trees remain while the development goes on, and I think most of the trees are to remain. And I raised it on the site visit that, yes, that's fine, and I 100% agree with that. But we've come unstuck in the past where we say that they build the houses, the trees are there, then someone buys a house and decides they don't like the tree and chop it down. There are quite a lot of trees there that looked like they're oaks. I didn't do a survey, but they do like the big solid trees, not low grade trees. What can we do to ensure that trees aren't lost once the new owners are in there? I know we can put in TPOs for an area. Is it possible that we can put a TPO in for that area, or what else do you suggest we could possibly do to retain the trees after land ownership goes in?
I don't think any of the trees on this site are of sufficient quality, either individually or cumulatively, to warrant tree preservation order. To be a preserved tree, it needs to be a tree of extremely good quality. There are some good trees on this site, but I don't think that they're actually worth preserving formally for a preservation order. We're in a slightly different situation here than we have been in other schemes where we've lost trees, in that this is a single applicant with a long-term interest in this site, that it's going to be managed by a housing association which will have particular responsibility for the maintenance of the whole site, and we have a management plan for the landscaping which we will require them to maintain the trees in a good condition and not remove them. Now, the report actually identifies, I think there are 2 groups of trees on the boundaries which need to be removed to facilitate development, but that loss is compensated for by the provision of 831 other trees across the site. So I'm not going to say every single tree on the boundary is going to be protected. It's not, some are going, but the compensatory provision far outweighs the trees that are lost. There's something like 13 trees that are going to be lost against 831 provided.
Thank you. The main trees were on the side going on to Kingshaw's that way to the east. That's where the Badger Walk's going to be, is that correct? So will the trees, because they're on the boundary, would they be within the Badger Walk, not within personal houses? Badger Walk. So they won't be in the land, that would be part of the landscape owned by the site, correct? Yeah. Okay, so that should... Okay, thank you.
Can I just ask a question? While we was on that site visit, it was pointed out there were some very young trees. Now, is it possible that we can get those moved?
Did actually ask the applicant. They weren't averse to it. So the response at the moment is, I'll have a look into that. I haven't had a final response, but if it can be achieved, I see no reason why it can't be.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Anderson, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In all the years that I've been on planning, you could tell by the grey hair, I've never seen a developer offer so many items. I've never seen all these items. We've had to ask for them. Sometimes we get them, sometimes we don't. They're offering extra provision in ownership in perpetuity, and that's in the conditions. The developer's given many helpful additions to this site, such as children's play area. We've had to ask for this for different areas in the past, and we haven't got to. And I think that's a great idea. Right at the bottom of the site there, a children's play area. Many new trees planted, many new trees. This is what the environment's all about, isn't it? This is what people have been asking for. The biodiversity has been improved on the site. Affordable homes. The developer's giving everything except £1,000 to every local resident.
Thank you very much, Councillor Anderson. Councillor Riley, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Following on really from the officer clarifications and a sort of justification that we're getting, I mean, highways improvements means that we'll be able to come back in again and talk with Essex County Council on this. I think it would be wrong if we don't take this opportunity now. As much as it doesn't meet with everybody's desire and the residents' requirement, I think this is such a good opportunity and I wouldn't want to lose this for this particular development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor Riley. Councillor Thornton.
Thank you, yes. It is a very good opportunity and we do need the affordable housing and the social housing. Unfortunately, it's in the green belt and the local plan hasn't been determined, and from what I can see, section 48B of the MPPF indicates that where there are unresolved objections to relevant policies in the plan, the greater the extent of those objections, the less significant the weight is carried by the emerging plan. Now, there are unresolved objections, quite significant unresolved objections to the emerging local plan. And therefore, I think that section B of number 48 of the MPPF is triggered in this instance. And I think that the application is premature and should come through the local plan process as it emerges. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Thornton.
I also have concerns. This is 44 properties. If you allow for 2 vehicles per property, and if you don't allow for that, you're still talking about 60 properties on the area, going out onto Hart Road at times when people want to go to work, when they want to take their kids to school and so on. That's a large amount of vehicles going onto a road that's already busy, and that's either going to cause backlog coming out of that particular area or issues when vehicles are coming into that particular area where it's going to block out the Hart Road area.
Thank you very much. Is there anybody else that wishes to comment on this? Councillor Hart?
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, the question goes back onto the site itself and the refuse collection that comes onto highways. How is it proposed for the refuse lorries to get on and off the site? Is it reversing in, go on and turn around? Is it provided?
It's all of the roads are capable of. All of the roads on the scheme are capable of accommodating the turning movements of a 32-tonne vehicle. So they'll go in forward gear and they'll come out in forward gear.
Are there any other questions or anybody else want to comment on this application at all? No? Okay. Right, members, for the motion before you is for approval. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion. Which one do?
Sorry, so those for approval.
Yeah.
1. Okay. Those against the recommendation? You're not voting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 against. So that motion fails then, Chairman. So now the committee need to put forward another valid proposal with valid planning reasons.
Could I have another motion, please, which must be seconded? Councillor Hart?
It's sad that we're in this situation because it is a good design and a good opportunity for the housing, but this time it's wrong. And the reasons I give for refusal is prematurity, as given by Councillor Thornton in the MPPF, and also it's under the 1998 local plan, it's on the Greenbelt.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hart.
We can add to that if anyone else has got any other.
Can we have a seconder for Councillor Hart's motion? Councillor Thornton?
I'll second that.
Thank you very much.
Does the planning officer want to make comment?
Do you want to say something?
The only comment I'd make in respect of prematurity, that's a very difficult argument to try and take forward on appeal. The MPPF is very clear. If you are going to refuse a proposal on the grounds of prematurity, you have to demonstrate how that scheme prejudices your local plan. Now, to be premature, it has to be in advance of something, so you can't rely on the 1998 plan for an argument of prematurity. It's going to have to be, if not this plan, the next plan. If it's this plan, then the arguments of prematurity really don't stack up, because within the context of your new local plan, HO20 makes provision. It allows for applications to come forward. So it's difficult to argue it's premature when your policy says it can happen. If you're talking about prematurity in the context of a future local plan, we have no idea what that looks like at the moment. So it's difficult to show how this scheme can be prejudicial. So whilst I can understand your sentiment about it, that's really not a sustainable reason for refusal.
Currently, the only local plan we have in place is the 1998 local plan. The only other plan we got currently that's in the process is the unadopted local plan. So in planning, we have to work on where we are at the moment, not if things change in the future. Then it is premature, in my opinion, because yes, the site is in H20, but H20 is considered as a whole, and master planning on that site was to be considered as a whole. You can shake your head, but I was at the master plan meetings. But it's been discussed, and it was meant to be discussed as a whole, and that's the whole point of having a red line boundary around the site. H20's got a red line around it for it to be discussed and master planned as such. Yes, it is. I understand what you're saying, but it is premature for the whole site. Whether there's other reasons we can add onto that for prematurity, saying it's because the local plan currently is here but not adopted, that whether that changes in the near future, I don't know, but that's the reason that it's premature, because it's going against the possible local plan. If it has no weight, if it is not come forward, then maybe that would change, but it's still protected by the 1998 local plan, and I still think it's premature.
Thank you very much, Councillor Hart. Is there anybody else want to say anything? Councillor Anderson?
Chairman, I need to understand what the planning officer is saying. And the planning officer's recommendation is we're not going to be able to use this. The proposal that's been put forward here. I need advice from the planning officer if she thinks it's going to succeed before we vote on it.
Can you clarify this, please?
Councillor Hart's concern is that bringing this site forward in advance of the rest of HO20 would be premature. Now, I think that argument would carry weight if it were not for the fact that HO20 actually recognises that parts of the site will come forward in advance of the master plan. And the policy says quite clearly, where that happens, and it can happen, that's fine, so long as you actually adhere to all of the requirements that we are going to expect from the master plan. So things like the Arcadian setting, things like no through routes, things like the provision of biodiversity net gain, all of those elements. Now, in the report before you this evening, I go through every single element in HO20 and explain how this proposal, in effect, ticks all of those boxes. So if you have a policy which you are trying to, if you're going to say that a proposal is in advance of the provisions of the policy, then that policy needs to have stated, and there shall be no deviance from this, and the whole site shall come forward at once. But it doesn't. The policy says actually bits of it can come forward, and providing that they tick all the boxes, that's fine. So in that context, to then try and argue that the proposal is premature to the policy becomes very difficult to sustain. It could be viewed as being unreasonable behaviour, and in an appeal situation, unreasonable behaviour can lead to awards of costs. So I think we need, if members want to refuse this, that's fine, that's your right, that's why we sit and debate these matters. But if we're going to go forward with a refusal, you have to have reasons which are strong and which are sustainable. You do not want to be introducing weaker arguments, which could then undermine your more robust arguments.
Councillor Thornton, please.
Yes, thank you. The issue of prematurity, it is difficult, and the MPPF acknowledges that it's a difficult one to get across the line, and you have to satisfy. Paragraph 49 of the MPPF goes on to counter it by saying that circumstances whereby an application can be refused on the grounds of prematurity are limited. In order to justify refusal on the grounds of prematurity, both sections A and B of section 49 need to be met. Section A, I believe, can be met, and so can section B. Particularly section B is met by virtue of the emerging local plan not yet being adopted and therefore formally part of the development plan for the area. And as I said before, in section 48, it says where there are unresolved objections, substantial unresolved objections to the emerging local plan. Now, this proposal is based on the emerging local plan and is using the evidence from the emerging local plan. There are unresolved issues with the emerging local plan, and we don't know how that's going to be resolved. So therefore, I think you need to resolve the issues before you use the evidence that underpin the local plan. And as I said, that's in section 49, A and B.
I understand where you're coming from, but the evidence is the evidence. Regardless of how you interpret the evidence, and evidence can always be interpreted in a variety of ways, that's why we have court cases. It can, but you have to consider it on the basis of the current evidence, because that's where we are tonight. And on the basis of the current evidence, we get to a situation where the recommendation before you is one of approval. If we go back to the issue of prematurity, which is where this argument started, your local plan policy does not identify this as being premature. It can't be premature in the context of the existing adopted local plan, so it can only be premature in the context of some other plan, because it's not premature in the context of the policy within the unadopted local plan. Because the unadopted local plan says you can do this.
So, is there, where are we, substantial objections to the local plan? The emerging local plan.
The fact that members resolved not to adopt the local
Exactly, and that's
Objections.
documented.
Yes.
That's documented through the
Exactly.
special counsel. So therefore, my feeling is that we meet the criteria for prematurity.
If that's the basis on which members wish to go forward, then that's the basis on which we can go forward. There's no issue with doing that, because now we have a solid basis for that prematurity, whereas previously we hadn't quite clarified where the prematurity was. But if we're going to go prematurity on the basis of 48 and 49, we can work with that.
Yeah, you can, but let me just say, we need a robust reason to refuse this.
Yeah, I understand that. But I think we have got a robust reason
Okay.
why. But the thing I want to ask is, there is another option open to us at the moment, isn't there? Isn't there not the option of deferring to the next council meeting?
Chairman, through you.
Yes.
At the moment, you've moved a motion for refusal, which has been seconded. Following that, once Kim says that, it's up to the planning officer if they wish to request a deferral. If they do not, then we go to a vote, and you need to vote on it.
I see no point in going for a deferral. My report will not change. The circumstances will not change, not within the context of this application. So, no, I wouldn't recommend deferral.
Okay.
Did you want to sum up the reasons, or would you have to sum up?
Would you like to sum up the...
Just so they're in proper planning terminology.
Right, so just to sum up, there are two reasons for refusal. Greenbelt, which is a fairly straightforward reason for refusal, and the second reason for refusal being prematurity as defined within paragraph 48 of the NPPF. Does that summarise members' views?
Okay.
So members now need to indicate if they are for refusal based on the reasons just given. If you are for refusal, then please raise your hands. Is it your hand raised, Chairman?
Yep.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 for refusal. Those against refusal? 1, and then no abstentions because that's everybody. So the application is refused, Chairman.
All right, thank you very much. Item number 2, Waterside Farm Sports Centre, Somnes Avenue, Canvey Island, and that's Canvey Island Westward.
Do you want to wait for people to leave? Sorry.
Okay.
Sorry, do you just want to wait for people to leave so
Yep.
Kim can be heard? Yeah, thanks.
Item 2, Waterside Farm Sports Centre, Somnes Avenue, Canvey Island. It's Canvey Island Westward. I'll now hand over to the planning officer to present this item.
Thank you, sir. Waterside Farm Sports Centre, I think members are pretty much aware of where that particular building is. What they intend to do, if I move on to the next slide, it's probably the easiest one. On the front elevation, there are a number of windows at that first floor level. It's proposed to place a vinyl advertisement within one of the upstairs windows on the front elevation, advertising the Castle Creek soft play area, which is a new facility that's provided within the building. It's a fairly innocuous sort of advert. It's child-friendly. It sits well back from the highway, so it's not going to be a distraction. It doesn't dominate the front elevation of the building, and there are no objections to it. Members are therefore asked to grant consent for the advert.
Okay, thank you very much. As this application is on Canvey Island, would the Canvey Island Town Council representatives like to say anything?
Yeah, the Canvey Island Town Council got no objections at all.
Okay, thank you. Before I move the recommendation, do any members have questions for the planning officer about this planning application? Apart from say what a wonderful painting it is in the window.
It's not really a question. It's just I'm just grateful that these kind of applications are coming back now.
Yeah.
Because I've already raised an issue locally about people putting banners up, and they should come through planning to get permission to put these banners up. So I applaud the council for doing this. Thank you very much.
So through you, just to clarify, because it's on council-owned land, it had to come here.
Yeah, no, all of them should have, all of them should have.
The planning officer's recommendation is that the advertisement consent should be granted. For the purpose of debate, I move the recommendation. Who wishes to speak first? Councillor Anderson.
Thank you, Chairman. Waterside Farm has been reported as being efficient by last officers that worked on this site, efficient for the next 25 years. So that's sports and leisure facilities. If this helps in any way, yes, let's have it.
Thank you very much. Has anybody else got anything to say? Any questions? Okay. Members, the motion before you is that the advertisement consent should be granted. May I have a show of hands, please? Those for the motion.
Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. That's unanimous.
Full
Chairman.
house.
So we
Full
don't
house.
have to do against or abstentions. Approved.
Okay. That concludes the business for this meeting. Thank you very much for attending, and good night. Thank you.